The Emperor of Rome has everything: marble palaces that touch the heavens, wealth to drown a dozen kingdoms, and power over the lives of millions. But in the dead of night, when the braziers burn low and the silence of the Palatine Hill is absolute, he has nothing. Nothing but fear. It's a specific kind of fear. Not of barbarian hordes at the frontier, or of scheming senators in the Curia. It is the fear of a footstep in the hall, the polished gleam of a helmet in the torchlight, the sound of the very men sworn to die for him. The Praetorian Guard, they are his shield, his elite, his final line of defense. But every emperor knows the chilling paradox of their existence. The wolf that guards the flock is always the closest to its throat. This is not a story of loyalty. This is a story of power, fear, and the terrifying truth that for centuries, the most dangerous place in the Roman Empire was not the battlefield, but the space right next to its ultimate protectors. This is the story of how the emperor's bodyguards became its kingmakers and its assassins. The idea was born from necessity, forged by the first emperor, Augustus. After decades of bloody civil war, he knew the new empire needed stability, but he also knew that bringing an army into the sacred heart of Rome was political suicide. The city had a deep-seated hatred for soldiers within its walls. So, he created a compromise, a force elite enough to protect him, yet small enough not to seem like a standing army. He called them the cohorts Praetoriae. Initially, only 3 cohorts were stationed in the city, discreetly housed with civilian families. They were the best of the best, handpicked from the legions, exclusively of Italian birth. Their pay was double, sometimes triple that of a regular legionary. Their term of service was shorter, just 16 years. They wore magnificent armor, ornate helmets with proud crests, and cloaks of deep purple, a color reserved for the emperor himself. They were a symbol of imperial power, striding through the forum with an arrogance that both intimidated and infuriated the common citizen. They were, in effect, a privileged class of warriors, but their true power was not yet realized. They were scattered, a force without a heart, a weapon without a hand wielded. That would change under Augustus's successor, the grim and paranoid Tiberius, and the hand that would first grasp this weapon belonged to a man named Lucius alias Sejanus. Was not an emperor, he was not even from a high-ranking noble family. He was the Praetorian prefect, the commander of the guard. But he possessed something more potent than bloodline: limitless ambition. He saw the guard not as a shield for the emperor, but as a key to the throne itself. With cunning whispers and masterful manipulation, he convinced Tiberius that for his own safety, the entire Praetorian Guard, all 9 cohorts, should be brought together, united in a single, massive fortress built just outside the city walls. The Castra Praetoria. Was a masterstroke of political engineering. Overnight, Sejanus transformed the guard from a scattered security detail into a concentrated army of nearly 10,000 elite soldiers, looming over the city. Their loyalty, which once belonged to the abstract idea of the emperor, now focused on the man they saw every day, the man who controlled their promotions, their pay, their very lives, their prefect Sejanus. He had turned the emperor's shield into his own personal sword. And with it, he was about to aim for the heart of the empire itself. Sejanus's ambition was a poison, and it needed to be administered slowly. A direct move on Emperor Tiberius was too risky. Instead, he targeted the future. He began a secret affair with Livilla, the wife of Tiberius's own son and heir Drusus. He twisted her mind with promises of marriage, of making her the Empress of Rome, the most powerful woman in the world. Together they plotted. In the year 23 AD, Drusus died suddenly. The official cause was failing health, but the truth was far more sinister: slow-acting poison, administered by his own wife, orchestrated by the man who commanded his father's guard. With the heir gone, Sejanus began systematically eliminating any rival, feeding Tiberius's growing paranoia. He convinced the aging emperor that Rome was a viper's nest of assassins, and that he would be safer away from it all. In 27 AD, Tiberius retreated to his island fortress of Capri, a self-imposed exile, leaving the entire administration of the empire in the hands of one man, the Praetorian prefect Sejanus. For years, Sejanus ruled Rome as its uncrowned emperor. Statues were erected in his honor, his orders were law, and the Praetorians were his personal army. But his ambition made him careless. He began to see himself not just as the power behind the throne, but as the rightful heir. His downfall came as his rise did. Through a whisper, Tiberius, isolated on Capri, finally received word of Sejanus's ultimate betrayal from his sister-in-law. The emperor's response was a masterpiece of paranoia and cunning. He promoted Sejanus, praised him publicly, and even announced a marriage between Sejanus's daughter and his own grandnephew, lulling his prefect into a false sense of security. Then he secretly appointed a new man, Naevius Sertorius Macro, as the new prefect of the guard. On the night of October 18, 31 AD, Macro executed Tiberius's plan. He discreetly met with the Praetorians, promising them a massive bonus from the emperor if they remained in their barracks. He then entered the Senate, where Sejanus was waiting, expecting to be granted the powers of a tribune. Instead, Tiberius's letter was read aloud. It was a long, rambling message, but its final sentences were a death warrant, accusing Sejanus of treason and ordering his immediate arrest. The senators, who once fawned over him, turned on him instantly. He was dragged to prison and strangled. His body cast down the Gemonian stairs to be torn apart by the Roman mob. The Praetorian Guard did nothing. They had been bought. The fall of Sejanus taught the Guard a lesson, far more valuable than any loyalty. It taught them their true worth. They had seen a prefect rule Rome, and they had seen him fall. They learned that emperors and commanders were temporary, but their power, the power of 10,000 elite soldiers at the heart of the empire, was permanent. And their loyalty belonged not to a man, but to the highest bidder. This chilling realization would curdle in the heart of the Guard as a new emperor rose to power. A young, unpredictable, and soon-to-be insane emperor named Gaius. History would know him as Caligula. He had watched the paranoia and betrayal destroy his family. Now he would unleash his own madness upon Rome, and upon the very men who were supposed to protect him. Caligula's reign began with promise, but descended into a fever dream of madness. The young emperor declared himself a living god, demanding that senators worship his statue. He appointed his favorite horse as a consul, but his cruelty was most keenly felt by the men who stood closest to him. He delighted in humiliating the Praetorian Guard, treating his elite protectors like personal playthings. He would force them to participate in his depraved orgies and mock their officers publicly. One of his favorite targets was a senior Praetorian tribune named Cassius Chaerea, a respected veteran whom Caligula relentlessly ridiculed for his high-pitched voice, often asking him for lewd and insulting passwords. For Chaerea and his fellow officers, the emperor's madness was no longer just a political problem. It was a deep, personal wound. Fear curdled into hatred. The protector's instinct was replaced by the predator's. A conspiracy was born, not in the Senate house, but in the shadowy corridors of the palace and the barracks of the Castra Praetoria. On January 24, 41 AD, during a series of games held for the imperial family, the conspirators chose their moment. As Caligula left the theater to address a group of young actors, he was funneled into a secluded underground passageway. Approached him, asking for the password of the day. When Caligula gave another obscene reply, Chaerea uttered the words, "Then take this," and plunged his sword into the emperor's neck. The other conspirators swarmed, a flurry of steel and vengeance. The emperor, the living god, was butchered on the stone floor, his last cries echoing in the tunnel. Chaos erupted in the palace. The Senate, hearing of the assassination, began to dream of restoring the old republic. Caligula's loyal German bodyguard went on a rampage, killing anyone in their path. The empire was headless, teetering on the brink of another civil war, and in that moment of absolute chaos, the Praetorian Guard made the move that would define them for the rest of history. They were not thinking of the republic, or of justice. They were thinking of their bonus, their power, their survival. A common guardsman named Gratus, scouring the palace for loot, pulled back a curtain in a secluded apartment. Cowering behind, it was a trembling, stammering man in his 50s, known to all as a bumbling, harmless scholar. The laughingstock of the imperial family, Tiberius, Claudius, Drusus. He was Caligula's uncle. As Claudius fell to his knees, begging for his life, Gratus and his fellow soldiers did not see a fool. They saw an opportunity. They saw a puppet. They saw the last adult male of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. They saw their new emperor lifting the terrified Claudius onto their shoulders. They carried him through the panicked crowds and back to the safety of their fortress, the Castra Praetoria. The Senate debated, but it was useless. The Praetorians had the swords, and now they had the emperor. They had not just killed a tyrant, they had created his successor from a man they found hiding behind a curtain. The price for Claudius's life was a massive donation to every man in the guard, an act that cemented a new, terrifying precedent. The Roman throne was now officially for sale, and the Praetorian Guard were the only ones selling it. Claudius, the emperor found behind a curtain, ruled with a constant awareness of the sword hanging over his head. He was intelligent and capable, but he never forgot who put him on the throne. He paid the Praetorians generously and treated them with respect, creating a tense but stable era. The Guard had their king, and the king knew his place. But this fragile peace was shattered by the ambition of Claudius's wife, Agrippina. After Claudius's suspicious death, she secured the throne for her own son, Nero. The price, a massive bribe to the Praetorian Guard, brokered by their new, ambitious prefect, Boros. The system of betrayal and bribery was now the accepted path to power. Under Nero, the Guard's moral decay was complete. They were no longer just kingmakers, they were the instruments of a monster, used to murder Nero's political rivals. His own mother Agrippina and his wife Octavia, the shield of the emperor, had become the dagger of the tyrant. Their corruption reached its grotesque peak after Nero's suicide in 68 AD, plunging Rome into the infamous year of the four emperors. The Praetorians, feeling their power was absolute, first backed the governor Galba, but when the old stern emperor refused to pay the bribe he promised, they assassinated him in the middle of the Roman Forum. What happened next was the ultimate symbol of the empire's decay. The Praetorians held a literal auction for the throne. From the walls of their fortress, they offered the Roman Empire to the highest bidder. The winner was a wealthy senator named Didius Julianus, who promised an astronomical sum to every soldier, but they had finally overplayed their hand. The hardened legions on the frontiers, men who bled for the empire daily, were disgusted. They refused to accept an emperor chosen by the pampered, greedy palace guards. The legions of Pannonia, led by Septimius Severus, marched on Rome for the first time. The Praetorians faced not a disorganized mob or unarmed senators, but disciplined, battle-hardened legionaries. They were utterly crushed. Severus executed the men who had murdered Galba and disbanded the rest, reforming the Guard with his own loyal soldiers from the legions. Their power was broken, but their legend of corruption lived on. Over the next 2 centuries, they would never again hold such absolute power. Their influence slowly eroded by emperors who learned from the past. The final death blow came from Constantine the Great. After defeating his rival Maxentius, whose forces included the last remnants of the Praetorian Guard, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, Constantine abolished them forever. He tore down their mighty fortress, the Castra Praetoria, erasing the symbol of their two-faced legacy from the face of Rome. They were created to be the ultimate protectors, a force to prevent civil war. But in the end, their greed and their power became the very poison that instigated civil wars, sold the throne, and rotted the empire from within. They were the emperor's shadow, a necessary evil that proved to be Rome's most intimate and fatal enemy.